Good afternoon, Hall of Fame Dynasty. It is I, once again, Jonathan, your host and commissioner. And today we will be going through our NHL Week 13 review. I know it's been a couple of weeks since we've done one, but obviously with Christmas and New Year's and everything else coming up, it's been a busy time for all of us. I know, Kevin, you just got back from a hunting trip, you said, and I know we've got Jared, who's been super busy with work, and I know a lot of us have had things going on with family. So we took a week off from it. We actually had a lot of interaction over the last few weeks, even with everyone gone. Between week 11 and week 12, we did have a lot of transactions. And we're actually starting to roll into the new year, and especially in hockey, it's going to come down to the end of it. It really looks like. The only person that's really running away with the league would be the Colorado Avalanche at 11-2 after this last week. But even then, the Blackhawks, the Golden Knights, the Hurricanes are only 3 games behind them. It's going to be a tight race for that number 1 and 2 seed in both divisions, especially with Jared and his Anaheim Mighty Ducks trying to chase the Colorado Avalanche. There's a lot to go into, so why don't we get started today? And I'm really excited because of the fact that it's such a close race. We've got the Rangers who are likely out of it and the Tampa Bay Lightning for this season. But there's a lot going on, and we've had teams trying to do their best to not only plan for this year and for the next few years. So why don't we get into some of the news? There were some big pickups, and then we'll get into the matchups for the day and predictions for week 14 and kind of a little going away thing for the say goodbye to the old year, move into the new one. So let's go here to our league news. And we actually had some really big pickups. One was by my Chicago Blackhawks. We picked up goalie Matt Murray after losing Carey Price to the IR, and also, I guess, him being injured, and his wife and him had their, I believe, second child or something like that. He happened to get hurt, and then 2 days late she was giving birth, so he's on the IR for also being injured. Then the LA Kings actually seem to be coming into their own recently after making multiple claims of center Brandon Peary, defenseman Justin Schultz, center who's a prospect Brandon Gaunce, and goalie Colin Delia for the Chicago Blackhawks, who he's actually looked really good, especially with Corey Crawford on IR, and who knows when he's coming back. So that's a good pickup by the LA Kings. And then we do have some quick league reminders. The trade deadline will be on January 27th. It is in the middle of the 2-week-long matchups that we have that coincide with the NHL All-Star break. We had it originally set to February 3rd, but that only leaves, I believe, 5 weeks until championships, and we don't want, just to kind of let everyone settle into their teams those last few weeks and everything else, kind of like we do in football. We have almost 8 or 9 weeks from the championships between the trade deadline and the championship break, and it'll usually be that same time every year, obviously depending on when it falls in the calendar year, but it'll always be right around that middle of that NHL All-Star break. And then players' rights can still be traded, but they will not be moved until after both teams are eliminated. I think the only reason we did it for NFL was the fact that we had so many moves, and with it being that way, I don't foresee that coming up every single year. With this being the first year, a lot of teams will be set in their ways, I think. But this is going to be going forward, as it has been in all of the leagues, that obviously cannot be moved and will not be moved until afterwards, especially for a season or matchups like this when it's everyday lineups. But let's get into the matchups. Obviously, we had a very heated matchup in a short week between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Chicago Blackhawks. And this one was believed to be a fight for the lead for the division. And unfortunately, it didn't come down to that because of the way some of the other games fell. But this matchup wasn't as close as I intended it or thought it was going to be, especially for two teams that have both been really hot, have been playing very, very well. And unfortunately, it did not fall in the way of Vegas as they fell 256 to 162.6. Obviously, they wanted it to be a bit closer. They were hoping they could have gotten some better performances. And with that beatdown performed by the Chicago Blackhawks, these teams now both moved to 8-5. Obviously, the Blackhawks would have been 7-5 going into this matchup. Vegas falls to 8-5. So they are both tied for second place now in the, I forget what division we are, but in that division. So why don't we break down this matchup and see exactly what happened? Obviously, right away, jumps out points from skaters, 250.6 compared to 162.6. Big difference, only 6 more starts for the Blackhawks, but almost 7 points per start this week was an insane average to have. I mean, we've gotten 5.5, 5.4, but especially in a short week to get 6.92 points per start for the Blackhawks was great. It's not like the Vegas Knights had a truly terrible performance. 5.25 points per start is really good. We've seen much worse performances than that, especially 3-4 points per start, and they had a great week. So unfortunately, it just didn't fall their way. 7 goals, 17 assists for the Vegas Knights, and they only had 8 penalty minutes on the week, so they played a fairly clean game. The problem here for them was they got 0 points from their goalies. Obviously, there weren't many starts for goalies to go around, and it was a very odd week for goalies. You'll see no one really had a lot of points. There was a lot of offense in the NHL this week, a lot of high-scoring games. And compared to the Blackhawks, it wasn't close, unfortunately. 13 goals, 24 assists, especially those 7 assists at 3 points per is 21-point difference. Blackhawks went with 0 penalty minutes this week, which was surprising. I mean, they've played a fairly clean game every week, but it's hard to avoid penalties, especially in the NHL. It's bound to happen week to week. The biggest thing here was the 15 power play points for the Blackhawks. And that was, I couldn't believe it myself, even though I'm the owner of it. 15 power play points in 4 days. Thursday? Well, technically 3 days, with most of the games coming on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And 5.4 points from goalies. Obviously, the biggest one came from Matt Murray and his 9 points on Saturday night. Mikko Koskinen did play in the week, but did have a very limited role as he had a negative performance this week. And the 3 stars of the week in this matchup were right winger Patrick Kane with 38.7. He had scored each of his last 2 games. He put up 3 points each, 3 goals or a hat trick on one night, and 2 goals and an assist the other night. Then it was the Sidney Crosby show for Vegas, and that was about all they got out of their team with his 27.9 points. No one else had a bigger blow-up than Sidney Crosby, as you'd expect from someone of his ilk. And you had defenseman Chris Letang, who the Chicago Blackhawks traded for in the last few weeks. He performed very, very well for them with 23.5 points on the week. So why don't we move on to our next matchup, as I actually grab my notes here, wherever I put them at. And we will move on to our next matchup, which was between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. We know Jared has been very, very strong this year. He's only 1 game behind his rival in keep, the Colorado Avalanche. And fortunately for him, he kept that deficit right where it was, as he took this matchup pretty handily by about just over 70 points, 175.5 to 94.1 over the Tampa Bay Lightning. They weren't able to find their stride this week. They were one of the only teams to not cross the 100-point mark, unfortunately. And because of that, like I said, the Ducks move up to 10-3, while the Tampa Bay Lightning drop once again to 1-12. It's been a rough year for them. Obviously, they weren't able to draft this team themselves. They stepped in later with Steve. And it's been a rough year, but I think he'll find his stride, especially once he starts combing through his lineup and seeing who he wants to cut, who he wants to keep, who he may try and get a prospect for. So let's look at this matchup. Big difference here in skaters. over 80-point difference between skaters. You can see there was almost a 1.2 point different per starts. 10 start difference as well. Ducks had 36 compared to the Lightning's 26, and the offensive output wasn't even close. You look at the 11 goals for the Ducks, 10 assists. Not the same kind of offensive performance that we've seen from them, but it got the job done because you know what? A W is a W, and that's all that matters. The big thing here was for the Ducks, 32 blocks compared to 11 blocks for the Tampa Bay Lightning. With a block being a point each, that's 20 points itself. Great defense, great defensive play from the Blue Liners for the Ducks this week, and excellent to see as they continue to make their strong push for the championship after winning in the NFL. They actually played very close between power play points and goalies, so the Tampa Bay Lightning did not get taken advantage of there. And the 3 stars of the week here were center Connor McDavid with 19.4 for Anaheim, and also Thomas Hertl, left winger for the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, put up 19.2, while you have right winger Kevin Fiala put up 16.2 points for Tampa Bay. That was his top performer of the week. Obviously not where you expect your own team to be, but it is what it is on a short week. It's tough to, because if you start out slow like the Tampa Bay Lightning did, you'll find yourself in a hole real quick. So moving on to our next one, we had the Nashville Predators and Kevin take on the New York Rangers. Now, I don't actually know if Kevin set his lineup for this week simply because we found out, I believe, on Saturday or Sunday that he was away on a camping trip. So whether he had access to his team or not may have made a difference, may have not. But either way, I'm going to go that Kevin did not set his lineup and continued to beat the New York Rangers because everyone seems to beat the New York Rangers this year. As Vic has not been heard from or seen recently, we know that he tries to set his lineup at the beginning of the week and leaves it at that. But Nashville and Kevin took their 40-point win, and they'll go home with it. They're happy to take that win, especially on the road, 176.5 to 132.2. And that will actually bump the Nashville Predators to 6-7, while the New York Rangers fall to 3-10. And this is the closest the Nashville Predators have been to 500 in a while. Obviously, they're in a very tough division with the Anaheim Mighty Ducks and Colorado Avalanche. They're the 2 best teams in the league to face, and it's unfortunate, but they've done very well for themselves. The trade of Chris Letang has worked out very well for them, as Dzingel and Kopitar have filled up those offensive line spot, or the offensive spots that they were missing. So it was a pretty impressive performance by Kevin. 164.5 points from his skaters, only 12 points from his goalies, with the Rangers putting up 125 points from their skaters and 6.6 from their goalies. Very close matchup all around for the most part. I mean, 40 points looks like a big win, but in a short week, it really isn't. 4.77 points per start. So the Rangers actually had the advantage on the average. But Rangers just didn't get enough starts. You really factor in another 10, even 9 starts, they're right there with them. 9 goals to 10 goals. The biggest difference here, though, was Kevin's 16 assists from his Nashville Predators versus 7 assists for the Rangers. Big difference there. Goals are always nice to have. Assists are usually easier to get and more consistently get, especially if they're primary assists. 72 shots on goal compared to 50. Obviously, if you're putting it towards the net or giving yourself the possibility of it going in, or at least rebounding and going off someone else, it's always a good thing. And especially for us who count shots on goal at 0.4 points per shot, it's a big difference there. 22 shots more really is always going to at least give you a big floor, a larger floor to, even if you don't score, you have something coming in. 8 power play points for the Predators, while the Rangers sat at only 5. Pretty close there. I think 12 was the highest score from goalies on the week. Like I said, it was a very offensive-based week this week. Not much from goalies. Very, very few goalies actually did very well. And 3 stars on the week, we actually saw Nikita Kucherov. I mean, he's been very hot this whole year. but he just hasn't, he's been consistent. He hasn't had the 30, 40-point weeks like we've seen from other players, but he's consistently putting up points, as he's already over the 50 or 60-point mark on the year in real life. So his 25.6 points led the game and the Nashville Predators to a win. We had two left wingers for the New York Rangers who did very well in Zach Parise, and I cannot read what's behind that because of this. Hey, I can hide that. What do you know? Come on, go away. Blake Coleman and Zach Parise at 18.1 points and 17.3, which is surprising. They've had some very good play out of Zach Parise, especially with Matt Dumba going down for the Minnesota Wild. A lot of people thought that the Minnesota Wild would have a lot of trouble scoring, but Parise continues to be consistent, especially on a good year like this. So as I mentioned the Wild, we'll move on to the Fantasy Wild here, who took on the Carolina Hurricanes in what was expected to be a very heated matchup, and I think a lot of it got lost in the shuffle of Christmas and New Year's and a lot of other things going on, because this is a very heated rivalry between these two. The Minnesota Wild have had a bad luck streak all year. When they faced great teams, their team shows up, and so does their opponent. And then you have some weeks where they should beat the Rangers or they should beat the Carolina Hurricanes, and they just don't show up. Unfortunately, that was the case this week, as the Carolina Hurricanes put up 202.8 points this week versus the Minnesota Wild's 149.9. That's a brutal loss for Mac and his Wild. I mean, with everything that he's put into this year, it's hard for him to lose, and it's always brutal for him to suffer that kind of performance, especially on a short week. And because of that win, the Carolina Hurricanes actually do lead the division now, all by themselves after being tied with the Golden Knights for the last few weeks. In the Chelios division, they sit alone at 9-4 now, while the Minnesota Wild dropped down to 4th in the division at 5-8, only ahead of the New York Rangers. So let's break down this matchup before we get too much into it. Big difference here was at the skaters, obviously. Goalies were both performed very well, but the skaters were the difference here. And Mac probably with one of his worst performances on average for the year. Carolina Hurricanes were able to put up 5.79 points per start on 35 starts. Minnesota Wild only sitting at 4.41, obviously below the 4.5 that we're used to seeing from them. They've been very, very consistent this year. They just haven't had the luck to go with it. And the biggest disappointment had to be in offensive performance. Obviously, the Carolina Hurricanes hit double digits in both goals and assists, while the Minnesota Wild were only in the single digits for that. Both had 6 power play points, 13-point difference here on the blocks, which would have made a big difference. But especially as I pull up the performances here, it's surprising to see the Minnesota Wild fall so hard after finally hitting a hot streak a few weeks ago. As I pull it up here, Minnesota and Carolina. And the biggest one that really let them down was Couturier of Philadelphia Flyers. He only put up 6.6 points this week. Kyle Connor, Nicholas Ehlers, Taylor Hall, Brady Tkachuk, Kiko Kapanen. He had a lot of brutal performances this week. 1.7, negative 0.4, 3.2, 4.2. Guys like Morgan Riley and John Tavares actually still had a very good week. But guys that have been very hot for the Minnesota Wild were ice cold this week. Rasmus Ristolainen was another one. Miro Haskinen has been mediocre at best recently, as he's been bumped down with Klingberg back in Dallas. And Klingberg was actually performing for the Carolina Hurricanes this week, as he put up 6.2 points in their couple of games. But just a brutal loss for the Minnesota Wild. Carolina led with the 3 stars of the week. Left winger Chris Kreider was a surprise to see at the top of the scoreboard here with 26.3 points. You had center and left winger Leon Draisaitl, 26.1 points, and then center Mika Zibanejad for the New York Rangers and obviously fantasy Carolina Hurricanes did very, very well with 20.1 points, which this was a great week for both teams. Unfortunately, Carolina just got out to a hot start, stayed there, as shown by the over 5.5 points per start this week. Now I'll move on to our last matchup of the week, which was the Colorado Avalanche and Los Angeles Kings. Obviously, LA Kings have been led, like I said, they've been very active recently, trying to put together their team, figuring out what they want to do, how they want to position themselves, not just for 2019, but going into 2020, 2021, and also the current season of 2018 as we sit now. And it was actually a lot closer. I'll give the Kings a lot of credit. They've been a very down team this year, mostly because of the fact that Chris is trying to set up his team how he wants to see fit. He wants to find his stride here. And unfortunately, he fell off the wagon, and it was a very close matchup. Our closest matchup of the week, 217 points for the Colorado Avalanche compared to 199.4 for the LA Kings. This was just a bad luck week for the LA Kings. I mean, if they face pretty much anyone else this last week, they win. The only teams they would not have beat this last week, Colorado, obviously, myself at 256, and Carolina at 203. They were the fourth highest scoring team this week, and unfortunately they leave this week with a loss. But they can leave their head held high knowing that their team is starting to perform. They're set up very, very well for a run at the end of this year. And we still have, let's see, so we've got week 14 all the way to week 22. They've got 8 weeks. It's going to be a brutal climb uphill, but they only have to get above the Minnesota Wild and Nashville Predators at this point. It's going to be a hard climb. They have a chance to do it. So I'm going to give the LA Kings a lot of credit here for taking on one of the hardest teams in the league this year to face in the Colorado Avalanche. And the Colorado Avalanche keep on stampeding across everyone, 11-2 on the season compared to LA's 4-9. So why don't we take a look and see how this matchup came to its conclusion and why it fell this way. Biggest thing here, obviously Colorado Avalanche getting 198 points on the week. It's almost the same amount of points that the LA Kings put up total. That's a hard total to beat. Just over 6 points per start for the Colorado Avalanche, and that was thanks to 9 goals, 17 assists, and an astounding 12 power play points on the week. That is a tongue twister. Try and say that 5 times fast. They had 31 blocks and 19 points from their goalies. Both teams actually had really good weeks with 19 points each. Very close matchup. And it's not just in the fact of performance stat-wise and counting stats, but you look even at the points per start. As we move on over to the LA Kings, they put up 180.2 points with their skaters, 5.7 points per start on 35 starts. That's great. I mean, they're right up there with myself, with the Vegas Golden Knights, right up there with everyone in terms of it. 11 goals, 11 assists. Obviously, goals count for more, but those 6 less assists made the difference here. 12 power play points as well, 36 blocks more, which kept it a very close matchup. And I like what I'm seeing out of the Los Angeles Kings. They're a very formidable team, regardless of what their record says on the year. That was a lot of it due to finding a new owner, finding their stride, trying to figure out, okay, who do I like on this team, who do I not? And I'll give them a lot of credit. I really could see them being a sneaky good team to end the year, and especially one going into 2019 and 2020, being a very tough team to beat. Chris, I'll give you a lot of credit for taking over a team that especially just got Patrice Bergeron back. That was huge for you. Jonathan Toews hasn't been performing. Brad Marchand, I believe, was hurt recently, so he's been banged up. Same with Patrick Marleau. This was a brutal week for the Kings to lose when it was right in their grasp the whole time. Luckily, they did have the top scorer on the week in this matchup as we go to the 3 stars of the week with defenseman Alexander Edler at 25.8 points for the Los Angeles Kings. And Colorado took the next 2 spots with center Dylan Larkin at 22.1 and defenseman Brent Burns, who they traded for earlier this year, at 21.1. So great performances out of both teams. Really, really close. And I think especially if they face off later this year, as I look, we could really see a toppling from the LA Kings. I could see them upsetting the Colorado Avalanche if they meet later this year. Let me take a look. Oh, not under results. There we go. So as we go down to later in the year, the Kings will meet up with the Colorado Avalanche in Week 22. So I wonder how much that's going to make a big difference here. So obviously, LA Kings to finish out the year, they have the Nashville Predators this week. They will take on the Golden Knights. They will take on the Tampa Bay Lightning, Carolina Hurricanes, Wild, Ducks. They pretty much face everyone in the league at least one more time. It's going to be a very, very tough road for them to get to the playoffs, but they have a chance. So look out for them. Keep an eye on that team. They're going to be my sleeper going into the playoffs, and I would not be too surprised if they actually make the playoffs. So I just realized I screwed that up, that I did not change that to Week 14. Whatever. Week 14 matchups, if I could scribble that off, and we'll just ignore it. So Week 14 matchups, we've got the Chicago Blackhawks taking on the Carolina Hurricanes, as I screw that up. Carolina Hurricanes. And this is a matchup that when these two teams last faced off, I believe the Blackhawks won, and it wasn't by much. So as I pull that up here, obviously Blackhawks come in on a win streak recently. They have won their last 5 games. The Carolina Hurricanes are sitting on a 4-game win streak. So both teams have won at least their last 4 games. It's going to be who loses first, and I don't think I can pick against my team at this point. As much as I am willing to do it, the way that they've been performing, especially guys like Patrick Kane, Chris Letang, obviously Phil Kessel's been hot. That whole Pittsburgh Penguins team has been very, very hot recently. But I'm going to go ahead and pick myself, and as I call that up, I'm looking for the last matchup that we played. Yeah, the last matchup, the Carolina Hurricanes lost by 30 points. So I expect another close game between us, and I'm excited to see how it turns out. Obviously, some games have already started this week. Neither of us has had a hot start to start from, so we'll see how that goes. For the Nashville Predators, they will host the LA Kings, who put up a great week. And as I pull it up here, the Predators did face off with the LA Kings earlier this year. That was back in Week 5. I don't believe we had found Chris at that point, but the Predators did win 250-208. I think both teams were kind of setting their lineups at that point. And this is actually going to be one of the matchup I keep my eye on the most this week, just because of the fact that the Predators have been a sleeper team all year. The LA Kings are putting their name into that pool at this point with a very active owner, which is great to see. And it was a hard pick for me, but I think I'm going to take the Nashville Predators just because they've seemed to find their way into a close matchup every week that they can, and they usually come out on top. So give me the Nashville Predators. I think it's going to be a very fun matchup. I think you guys should keep an eye on it as well. And especially with the ties between those two, it's going to be a fun week. Now we have the Colorado Avalanche taking on the Vegas Golden Knights. And as I speak, if you have not looked and checked your hockey team for the day, we did have some early matchups today. And a lot of that obviously due to a lot of teams being off tomorrow and the Winter Classic tomorrow. The Vegas Golden Knights lead 36-5.5 over the Colorado Avalanche. And I'm going to pull that up because I'm actually very curious how the hell it got there to that point. Because 36 points on a day when it was an early start and not a lot of games going, I feel like we need to dive into this because obviously I was going to take the Colorado Avalanche this week. That's who my prediction still will be. As I pull it up, Ryan Johansson of the Nashville Predators is sitting at 14.2. Ryan Ellis for the Nashville Predators at 8.4 for the day. PK Subban with 4. And a lot of that actually came from a deal between between myself and Chris earlier this season, with Johansson and Ryan Ellis being a part of that deal. Nicholas Backstrom put up 7.1, so it's a great day and a great start for the Vegas Golden Knights, who need a win this week, especially if the Blackhawks are able to take one over on the Carolina Hurricanes. Obviously, big difference in 5 players to 1. I'm still going to go with the Colorado Avalanche on the week. That's my prediction. Especially though with the Vegas Golden Knights getting this type of performance right away, that's a good sign for them. I mean, they know it's at least going to be close if they are on the losing end of it. And if they're on the winning end of it, that means they got off to a great start and they were able to hold it. I will still take the Colorado Avalanche at this point, as they've proven that they are a very tough team to beat. They are resilient. Next, we move on to the bottom two teams of the league. And I would love to see your guys' suggestions for teams that end up at the bottom, because obviously this is the only league we don't have minor league picks in. Or not even minor league, but rookie picks in. We just have a pick up and drop system for rookies, especially with how volatile and random hockey is when it comes to that, because you have guys that are drafted at 16, 17, 18. Rather than sitting on those guys for 3 years, I think it's best that we are very fluid with our minors, especially with the way it is. And with the hockey not getting the coverage it probably deserves. We'll have to find some kind of boost for the lower teams. That way there's an incentive to sell off older pieces, so that way they don't just rot. Obviously, New York Rangers taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning. 3-10 for the Rangers, 1-12 for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm going to take the Rangers. As hard as it is to pick a true winner in this one, it feels like they're both losers at this point. So give me the New York Rangers. I'm going to take them this week in a very brutal matchup where I'm expecting the score to be 140-130, while the rest of the league is sitting up at about 200. So give me the New York Rangers in a very mediocre matchup. Next, this is actually game number 2 for me on the week. I know both of these teams are good. The Wild just haven't been living up to the expectations, and I still love their logo, because it's got so much going on with the trees and the sun and the bear and everything else. Regardless of that, this is an easy pick for me. I'm going to take the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. They've been great all season. They've been one step away from the Colorado Avalanche all week, and I know the Mighty Ducks will be cheering on the Vegas Golden Knights, not only for the fact that it would topple the Colorado Avalanche, but it would also bring them up higher in the standings and would help them in determining the number 1 seed later this year, because if the Vegas Golden Knights stay on their run, they could make a push for a number 1 or number 2 seed, especially because it goes to the division winners. The Ducks should be rooting for the Vegas Golden Knights over the Colorado Avalanche, especially if they want to win the division. So maybe they can get some luck at the end of the season like they did in baseball, where they were able to take the division away in our inaugural season in baseball. So give me the Ducks in a pretty dominating win this week. I think they will win by at least 60, just because of the way that the Wild have performed. And I laughed because I just saw your mention there, Kevin, in saying "fuck the Kings" this week. So obviously Kevin is rooting for his own team, not rooting against them. He's got some confidence going into it. I'm excited to see how that matchup really turns out. That's my game of the week this week, is the LA Kings versus the Predators. And that's all I've got for NHL review and preview this week. So I just want to say thank you guys for everything. You guys have been great this year. Just remember, be safe. Thank you for all the fun times, the laughs, the images shared, the videos shared, the trash talk, the entertainment, the camaraderie. It's been a blast doing this for you guys week in and week out. I'm glad I started it. I hope you guys, if you have any interest in joining me, especially when it comes to the playoffs, if you want to jump in and have some comments for your opponent, if you want to have something out there, whatever it is, you always hit me up. And thank you guys for being such a great league, great friends, great everything. You guys have been awesome. Just be safe out there tonight, whether you're going out and drinking, whether you guys are just traveling with a family to visit a friend or something else. Be safe out there, please. It's a really very busy time of the year for everyone, and especially there are always people that take it way too far and don't do what they should. But thank you guys for any of the stress relieving weeks, stress relieving days. If you guys ever need anything, don't be afraid to speak out to myself, especially. I'm always here for you guys. I'm a dad. I know how it is. Everyone gets stressed. Everyone has their rough times. But remember, if you guys are having issues, let me know. we are a band of brothers is the way I look at it. We are here for one another, or should be. It's a league not just for the competition, but the camaraderie. So thank you guys for a wonderful year. I will see you in the new year. If you guys have any rule changes or anything else, if you guys have some suggestions on the show, on something else, I'm always open to criticism. So like I said, thank you guys once again. Have a happy holidays. Have a happy new year. Be safe out there. I will talk to you guys in the new year. And if I'm always open for trades. You guys know me. I'm always listening and talking. So have a wonderful new year, guys. This is it. This is John signing off for 2018. See you next year.